Hello and welcome everyone to our next talk, bringing us to the AI era of product design. For users, must be a dream, yeah? User interfaces that adapt to your needs within the moment. For me, testing applications and workflows, it's a nightmare. I suppose I will hear something like, works on my machine even more often in the future. So that's why we have Christoph Bieselt here, our next guest. He is lead designer at DAYY, and he brings 15 years of UX design experience into this round, giving all us, mainly developers or more on the tech side, his view from the designer side. Christoph focuses on emerging fields that impact UX and design, and I think there's nothing that has more impact at the moment than AI, and he will introduce us to how this will affect UX design in the future, and also how this changes how we work in interdisciplinary teams. So please join me and give a big welcome to Christoph Bieselt.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Florian, for the introduction. Yes, so I had it already running for a couple of minutes, the conversational, generative, contextual interface you see there. Just as a fictional example of this category that we're talking about today. So this is one app, essentially, but with very different contexts that these people have, it behaves very differently. It shows different responses, it shows different UI elements, interactive elements that the users can interact with and select services, for example. It goes into different states of mode, depending on the context. So it is highly personalized, hyper-personalized, I would say, this type of interaction, and we're seeing it more and more. And we're seeing it more and more across all kinds of different types of products. This is a chatbot example that I chose just for, like, it's very illustrative of what these concepts are, I guess. But what all these interfaces or products that we see right now have in common is that they're conversational. So there's this iterative back and forth between the machine or the AI and the user. It is, in that sense, somewhat collaborative as well, because you have a little bit of give and take between machine and human there. We see generative interaction design, which means it's non-deterministic in the sense that we don't really know what to get. It can steer in this direction, can steer in that direction, so that's kind of hard to control and steer. And these generative interfaces that we're seeing are also capable of richness in the UI, meaning it's not only text that we're seeing. And in the examples, you've seen some richer UI cards that are fully generated by the LLM in the background or the orchestration in the background. So all of these are moving parts that we as designers, and in essence, designers and developers as a collaborative team, of course, have to steer and manage. And then lastly, and I think most importantly for these types of products, they're highly contextual. That means they have a memory to use, they have external data sources to use, they have tools and capabilities that hook them into different things. In some cases, they are event-aware, they are multimodal, so they can react to the bigger context. And for us as designers, and of course, developers as well, it's a big task to wrangle that big context, to see what is really relevant, what fits the use case, and what might better be discarded. And as I said, this chatbot example is only to illustrate the point. We see this behavior in other interfaces as well. So for example, we see here a chat-type interaction for a financial consulting interface where we have parametric input on the right side that gets automatically filled by the context from the chat. We have sentiment analysis of the call running in the background. So there's lots of different moving parts that you have to consider and then eventually design for. So what we've seen from our clients in the past couple of months is more and more of these type of questions. So project owners, stakeholders, our tech partners, they're asking, can you create a screen flow for this? Or what happens exactly when the user asks this? And the answer is more and more, we don't know. It's like really, it's dependent on a lot of different factors. And we can't really give you exactly these artifacts that you can use in your internal communication or within the team. So where it was before, as I said, linear journeys, linear flows that go from A to B conditionally, we now see more and more these scenarios where you have probabilities in there, and you can go that way or this way, and you somehow have to describe it. Or, as I said, with the UI, we see different approaches to handle that. It's either a somewhat modular UI that has fixed elements that you can describe in a static wireframe or so. But then you have design systems in corporations that are somewhat atomic, and you can assemble them together into new kinds of interfaces. How do you ensure brand consistency, for example, when suddenly the machine can put a button in the card which might not be your favorite brand color? So these types of artifacts that we've used for quite some time now in the product development process with stakeholders, with developers, like personas or wireframes, screen flows, information architecture diagrams, all these things as UX strategists and designers we've been using to communicate our design intent to the team, to the stakeholders. But now it's a little bit more like jazz improvisation, what happens, and these like very fixed, defined things don't work anymore, or to a degree don't work anymore. So what are these artifacts doing for us? What is the purpose? Primarily to align people, of course, to align stakeholders, to align the development team, to document decisions, to reduce ambiguity. You're talking about this, I'm talking about this. Can we find a common ground? Do we use the same terminology for the things we're designing, and so forth? So all these things are supported by design artifacts. And since we can't answer these questions from our partners anymore very good, we started to build a new design framework which collects new types of artifacts that serve that purpose. And our goal is a little bit to go from this fixed linear product description where you would design something very specifically and that would be exactly what the user gets, move more towards this area here where we are shooting for a slightly fuzzy target, but it is controlled in a way that we own and that is not like in others' hands. And hopefully bypass the middle, which is this immature AI product thing we're seeing also, where there was an intention from the design or product team, and then the actual user experience is drastically different from that, or is drastically different from user to user, and oftentimes also a little bit frustrating. So this framework basically consists of 4 main parts that we looked at. It is strategic evaluation. I don't think you can read the bottom too good there, but which is concerned with like the value, the risk, the strategic planning of the product within the business context. So what performance can we expect, for example? How do we assess the performance? What are the foundational specs we should consider? And then as a second part, we have something specific to non-deterministic UX, which just focuses on the behavior of the app. Like, for example, it describes rule sets for different intents and purposes that the user might have, and how do we respond to that. So that's a lot. I would describe it as the new user flow, or like a new type of wireframe flow, maybe. And then we have context design, which I think for these personalized experiences or generally AI products is a foundational part that should be considered in the product development and design phase already. I think right now it is mostly looked at in the actual engineering development phases, where people start to collect different data sources and put them together and see what works, write different agents with different prompts and tool sets that can accommodate certain context assemblies. but we don't have it in the designer's hands right now. And then lastly, the point about generative UI, like how do we describe these assembly types, curated interfaces without designing 100 different variants of like one modal as it could be, and then just to find out it is not in the actual product. So this is just a quick overview of the different design artifacts that we have in those different groups. So when you move from left to right, the strategic stuff would be like setting the stage and direction. Then we have define and monitor the behavior. The context design is a little bit like make the backend work, even though backend is not to be understood as a technical term here. And then generative UI is more like make the front end work. And then we have exemplary, a couple of different artifact names, and due to the time constraints that I have in this talk, I will only show you like 1 or 2 examples of what this looks like, or could look like. And these examples are also reduced and simplified just to make them work on the slide a little bit better. So let's start with strategic evaluation. So we have risk and testing blueprints. We have capability maps, which look at the actual tools and features that this product might have. What can we essentially communicate to the end user? This app can solve this problem because it can do X. We have guardrails design, which is the foundation of behavior in this case. So we have constitutional rules, for example, which describe the basic business rule set. We have strategic rules, which describe a little bit more the like the value proposition from a business perspective. And then, of course, we have tools to assess the value and the return on investment, because that's also a question, of course, we get all the time during the early stakeholder talks, like, what does this make? Does this return on our investment in some way, and how is it structured, that return? So this is an example of a somewhat truncated guardrails design document, where we have on the left the constitutional rules, which, as I said, those are the masters. They can't be overridden by anything else, and the system would fail rather than compromise on any of these. And within that, you have descriptions of ethical principles. You have descriptions about safety. You have descriptions regarding to legal and compliance constraints. But you also have rules like accessibility, general rules. So all our products must at least follow this accessibility guideline. In the middle, you have the strategic part, which is, as I said, more a aspirational set of principles, which describe the strategic direction of the product. So what kind of performance do we want to deliver to the user? What do we think about brand consistency? Like, what is the area we're striving for? You've seen earlier this little fuzzy circle in the middle, and I think this is a good example of that. Maybe the brand will not be 100% exact on style guide within the product that I'm showing, but if 85% of people can recognize it as my brand and identify this product with me, that might be enough. So it's a little bit more like shooting for a certain target and accepting that we might be a little bit off, but we're off because we know it. And then in the C bucket here, we have architectural and systemic guidelines, which are more, I would say, the structure to hold it all together, basically. So we have basic component combination rules that, for example, these UI cards that I've shown you can only contain text, images, and so forth, but they cannot contain forms, let's say. So that's a very high-level construction rule. Or we have something like pipeline validation rules. So, for example, every interface needs to, or like essentially every input needs to go through a pre-flight check to validate it, to see if it's harmful or not, and all these things. But then also the output needs to be validated. So there might be screenshots being made of every type of response that we generate that gets evaluated, and we see what is on-brand, what is off-brand, what is not working for the user, where we have a problem with construction of the UI and so forth. So these are like the highest level examples, and then we have a couple of more that go into a lower level description. This is an example of an artifact that we use to assess value, and we're using kind of like a traditional desirability, feasibility, and viability framework to do that. But we also added elements to that. that are specifically towards the AI use case. Essentially, things about risks, mistakes that the AI can make in the viability part or in the feasibility part. The discussions that we have right now are a lot about infrastructure and how can we get that ready to put our product on top, which I guess is a topic you're all familiar with. And then we also added an entire new dimension, which we call usefulness, which answers or should answer the question, does it work well? Is it actually what we set out to do? And this is primarily measured by context quality, the response quality, the capability effectiveness, not only because I can offer a tool, does it solve a user's problem? So we have to find a way to find the effectiveness in that. And is it behaviorally appropriate? If my AI product suddenly starts insulting people, that is certainly not an appropriate behavior. Extreme case, I know, but this is meant by that. And essentially, we want to prevent desirable but useless products, which I think we see some of in the market. So we kind of have the measure of potential usefulness, which is context breadth and context depth, multiplied maybe by the behavior design capabilities and traditional UX. So don't get hung up on the formula, but that's somehow how we see the potential usefulness, but we describe it qualitatively in this framework. And then non-deterministic UX is, for example, made up of sample dialogues. So how do we envision people interacting with this? It's kind of like a fictional role-play scenario. We have recovery and mitigation patterns, like when we see the conversation getting off topic, for example, how do we react to that? How do we handle transparency issues where a user might not know, why is this happening? Can they ask for, why is this happening? Do we get an answer to that? And then we have intent and scenario mapping, which I'll show you as an example here, where we say, okay, we can't really define 100 different interfaces for 100 different interactions or even more, but we may be able to classify these intents that the user might have into groups and then go from there. So what you see on the left is an intent class, which is a high-level object, which in this case is called the user's looking for immediate help. And within that, you have discrete intents, which is the user's looking for immediate medical help, which dramatically already shifts the whole thing in a certain direction. Or the user is looking for immediate transportation help, again, shifts that in a completely different direction in terms of context, in terms of UI elements that I can use, in terms of responses that I should generate, in terms of tone maybe also. And then you see some examples of actual prompts the user might input to trigger this certain intent. Then that goes through the input guardrails that we have defined, and then we assess the confidence. Confidence meaning, okay, if somebody says this, how confident are we that we put them into the right intent category? And then we define possible response plans. So for example, in this case, medical help with a high probability. The main goal for the AI would be to provide the fastest professional medical help on location. The next actions or the best actions for the AI to take would be to notify the emergency services, next of kin, and then mitigate the situation. The main risks, of course, are in a medical high-stakes scenario like this are enormous. So I just wrote down a couple, but wrong location, can't notify the services, user cannot respond anymore. There's a lot of those. And they, of course, directly feed into the general risk assessment that we have to make at the early design stages as well. What is the minimum needed context to satisfy that intent? I need the identity, I need profile data, I need the location, I need my available services. Can I call emergency services? I might only promise it to the person, but I can't really, so I need to know my capabilities in that case. Me being the AI. Then we have the output guardrails that are already addressed. We have to look at that. Is it really what we want? And then we show UI examples of what such a type of conversation could look like. And this is a very concrete artifact that I can sit down with a developer, sit down with a stakeholder and talk through, and deliver it over the pros and cons of this, like should we exclude this case? Can we exclude this case? Does it necessitate a more traditional conditional flow where we lose the whole probabilistic part and go into a linear thing that is 100% controllable? Because it's so business critical. All these talks can be had over this type of artifact. And then context design. So the goal here is definitely to help the teams align on how to build the information architecture. Talk with systems architects that are right now like trying to figure out how to best set up their databases, how to best set up the information flow within the organization. So we have to hook into that and see what's available, what can be made available. And then also, of course, start planning the actual implementation with something like prompt patterns, tool call instructions, and so forth. And for that, we have a set of general design principles that we use. It's a big bucket of design principles that we pick and choose from and then define more closely in the process. For example, we say this is a context-first architecture, so without a good context, nothing of this will work. Privacy by design, meaning we have certain privacy and legal compliance standards that we have to abide by, which is the starting point, the high-level starting point to get into it. But then we have more low-level descriptions also that we can talk about. So for example, on the left, you see the context dimensions, just an overview of possible context dimensions. So from a user context to a session context to an environmental context to a business context, we have to at least look at everything and see, does it make sense in our specific product? Can we get it? What do we need to do when we get it? Do we have dependencies created for ourselves with that and all that? So that's the first step, to gather all that data or the possibilities. And then we define certain slices, like how do we handle that? One example would be the context lifecycle. Freshness, staleness, expired has different implications on the product. Because if the context is not up to date, I might deliver wrong promises or wrong answers. And then we put that through a general quality assessment where not only freshness plays a role, but also completeness, reliability. So if this is not available to the AI at all times, it might not be a good scenario. Are there any internal conflicts? We sometimes have the case that the context is somewhat contradicting itself within itself, so we have to mitigate that. And then we can derive some further rules from it. So here's an example for a confidence to personalization rule set. When we say we're 90% plus confident on that the context is fine and works, we can go full personalization, do it like really to the person. When we're only 50% or 70% sure, then we should ask the user again for clarification before we give them a wrong answer, and in typical AI fashion declare it as this is it. And then lastly, generative UI, we need also a couple of artifacts and new things to somewhat augment our design handovers to developers, specifically, I guess, front-end developers in this case, but also I think the roles are somewhat blurry in that instance because the front-end developers have become, in this instance, a little bit of back-end developers and the other way around as well, because if I want to display something in the UI in the front-end, I need to really hook into the architecture and see how it's triggered, how it's generated and being output. So this is an example of how we could communicate that, for example. So we have adaptive guardrails as the base. So these are like, again, high-level rules that should never be changed for this UI generation. For example, we have an aspect that's called interface stability. Which types of the UI should never change? They're just static. Like, for example, the navigation could be completely static, where content is exchanged for contextual content. That would be described there. But then we go down to the actual UI components that we have, the design system that we're managing. But instead of, as I said, defining 100 different variants that the developer has to look at and see, like, what do I implement actually, we define rule sets. And these rule sets reference stuff that we already have. Like, for example, the icon rules, just as an example up there, they reference the intent classes that we've defined. So, for example, we have a set of, let's say, 50 icons that the AI can choose to put in this card as a representative icon for this use case that the user is interacting with. Of course, I don't want to have a medical emergency and then see that icon in there or something else. So we need to map it to the intent classes and see, okay, we are confident that this intent, I need medical assistance, is the actual scenario that we're moving in, so I can choose an icon from that library and maybe use the, I don't know who was here in the previous talk, the embedding techniques for the emojis for this type of thing as well, because I think that would lend itself to it. So, I think our design handovers will look more and more like this, where we start as designers to define rules, which directly can be transported into schemas, tool definitions, prompts that are written to actually trigger this generation. So we're also moving a little bit more as designers into the developer tech domain in this case, which is a development I've seen anyways. Designers start to prototype more and more in actual code to communicate their ideas because, same problem, the typical design artifacts don't work too good anymore, so why not just prototype it and somehow communicate my intent that way? But that is not always suitable for like bigger projects in bigger corporations that have a lot of moving machinery and stakeholders involved. So to recap, we need these new communication tools. I'm fairly certain of that. We've seen it from our clients and the discussions that we have. Within our agency as well, the team alignment changes. So if we wouldn't do it for others, we would just do it for ourselves, just to have better discussions and talks. And as I said, the roles and focus of the teams involved in building these products has also changed. And it's also a little bit more the mindset that has shifted from creation, meaning I need to define every little last pixel perfect instance of something, to curation. I have a lot of different moving parts. How do I best assemble them? How do I select what is really relevant and necessary? And how do I describe that best? And I think we're also entering a phase of maturation. Certainly in the engineering, in the technical world, there's more and more stuff coming out now that is moving from an experimental phase into a production-ready, reliable, trustworthy framework, or another technology that we might use. In the design world, that is not the case. There's still a lot of lag. People are somewhat behind regarding that, and that's a little bit what we want to answer with this type of framework. So currently, these artifacts that I talked about, we test them with clients, with projects that we're actually doing right now, and refine them while doing that and see what actually works good in communication, what does not. But we also want to publish these. We want to make them available, either as a Figma template, for example, or a Notion template, because, of course, very close to large language model is large language description, so a lot of this is text, which is also something that designers have to do more and more, write succinct and good text to communicate their design intents. And we, of course, would love feedback on this, and feedback especially from the tech community as well, because, as I said, this is not a design-focused thing, it is a collaboration and communication-focused thing. That should ideally benefit every one of us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those insights. I mean, direct feedback, I would love to start implementing that right now. Yeah, sounds amazing. Do we have questions in the round here? Let's start from here and then come back.
So thank you for the insight. So one of the things I had to think about when you said you were moving away from pixel-perfect designs and giving the a bit more freedom, I would have loved to have this when I was a developer implementing pixel-perfect designs. Yes, so yeah. The AI is now getting a bit more freedom than developers back then. But you know, I would just give my feedback that we should also start, if you're starting this and testing this, you should also consider starting this on more traditional projects. If you're not doing a chatbot or something, if you're doing another thing, maybe kind of use this contextual thing more even in the classical projects.
No, I agree. That's true. And I think in this scenario, it is essential. I mean, if you don't do it, it's essentially not a good product. While in others, it adds a good background information that everyone benefits from to describe these scenarios in that way. And I agree with you specifically regarding the pixel-perfect UI generation. I think it was always not the greatest idea to expect from a developer to do that, but rather to also discuss with them the design intent and what the goal should be and what we should achieve together without having this somewhat contentious relationship sometimes, like the designer wants this, but you know what I'm talking about.
Thanks for the great talk. I'm over here.
Still not seeing. Ah, there you go.
One of the things that I was thinking about is how automated this is. In particular, you were talking about basically you have a set of sort of input phrases that users might use, and you test how it responds to that. LLMs are great at generating text. So do you use actually LLMs to generate that whole process, and how much of that is sort of built into a pipeline that automates itself?
It is not yet. But that is the goal for exactly that reason. I mean, it is a good exercise for a designer to actually think about the 100 different prompts that a user might ask, but I don't think it's necessarily the right use of time. So for certain parts of this, generated content is relevant. We just have to make sure that it's not becoming a beast of its own and then gets passed on without being looked at, because then we create a whole set of other problems. But yeah, I agree.
Then we have another question.
Hey, thank you for the talk. So a lot of this was based on generating UI from the AI, as far as I could tell. But oftentimes this is also abstracted away, and you have some AI component way back that generates the content, but you're still in charge of the UI. And for me, what's left then is the uncertainty of the answers and the chance that the answer is wrong. So I wanted to ask what your experience is on how to best communicate this possibility to the user without saying, oh, without telling him everything we do could be wrong. So yeah.
No, so I mean that is I think a multi-dimensional problem with the output being wrong. I mentioned the output guardrails there. I think you can do a lot right now with actually checking for wrong things after the fact, which introduces a little bit of latency, I guess, but it does make maybe the output better. So there is a tech way to do it. But there's also a design way to do it, and I think that is transparency and disclosure. So you have to tell the user what your confidence thresholds are. You have to instruct the AI to, if unsure, ask back, and that's a plain statement that I'm giving here that is a little bit more complicated to really facilitate, of course, but I think that is the design way to do it, to take the user into this collaboration and tell them, as you would a person. I'm not entirely sure what do you mean by that. So,
do we have another question here in the round or also online and in the Zoom participants? Then we have one more.
Hi. Maybe it's a little bit off topic, but I'll ask anyway. Where do these confidence numbers come from? So you said something like from 70 to 90% we should do this, but where does it come from? And in particular, is it a good idea to tell an LLM in a prompt, please at the end say how confident you are in percent or so, or is it more?
I think also that it's a combination. I mean, this is a design artifact to have exactly that discussion with an engineer as well. Like, how do we facilitate that best? But I think the first thing is to identify the markers that we have to construct a confidence level. So, for example, did we get all the context that was necessary to answer that question, or was something faulty in that? Did we interpret the semantic stuff from the user wrong? So, like, all our following thoughts were wrong as well. And there, I think LLM evaluations can play a role to like have one LLM monitor the output of another LLM, which I guess a lot of companies are already doing with their stuff. So they have regression tests running with exactly that. And I think it is a combination of those like textual outputs being in a regression test as well as the fully generated UI being in a regression test, meaning we look at it, we see what's wrong, we try to mitigate it either in the scenario itself or after the fact for the next user. So there's a lot of iterative getting better involved, I think. Not 100% sure I answered your question well.
I'm sure there are, okay, here, yeah, one more question we can do.
Thanks a lot for the great question, for the great talk, and for the nice framework you presented here. My question is, so in future, if you see things like OpenAI is now integrating more and more things like product recommendations, and Microsoft is working on concepts like NL Web, where the idea is that you chat with an existing website and things like that. How can you transfer this concept into the future, where maybe the interface is not coming from a specific company, but it's coming from OpenAI or Perplexity or something else?
I mean, we're seeing this. OpenAI released, I think, 2-3 weeks ago, I don't know, this Agent Kit framework, where they heavily promoted widgets, which is essentially what I just showed you, like rich UI elements that you can integrate into the chat. And you define them by just writing down an XML schema. They have right now in their basic building block library no branding or anything in that case, so you can't make it your own. But they want brands to use that and use it like for their brand. But there are and they offer some guardrail stuff in there as well in the Agent Kit. But there's a lot of trust giving involved to put your brand into OpenAI's hands in that case. So I think I would make the case for building that stuff and own it, and not put it in that pipeline, but I think the general principles apply to both. Like how would I communicate with the user? How would I describe my component? How would I describe the personality of the AI and so forth? Or was that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure there are 100 more questions in here, but Christoph will be around for the rest of the day and also now for the lunch break that we are already heading towards. From here, your next lunch location is outside the door to the left at the High Line, so just stay on this floor. With that, yeah, let's thank our speaker again and yeah, enjoy your meal.